Hey everyone, and welcome to Procure Pulse, the managed services podcast that provides you with current trends, best practices, and the latest supply chain news to help you stay informed. I'm Mickey Meehan, your host, and I'd like to invite you to email us with all your questions at info@conductive.com or connect with us on LinkedIn by following Conductive or on Twitter at Conductive Inc. Thanks so much for joining us today. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Mickey Meehan, your host of Procure Pulse. And today, joining us for our episode, we have Adam Ellsworth, Director of Strategic Sourcing here at Conductive, and someone I've had the pleasure of working with for quite a while. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Hey, Mickey, thank you. Very happy to be here.
I thought maybe we could start. You've been doing this now for almost 13 years. Be great to just hear about a little bit about your background, maybe how you fell into purchase services. I mean, did you grow up wanting and wishing to be a director of strategic sourcing, or how'd you fall into it? All those kind of details. I think everyone would enjoy hearing.
Yeah, no, I can't say that I come from a long line of proud strategic sourcing managers. Is actually something I just sort of fell into by accident, sort of randomly. Actually, I was working in accounting previously, just doing project management there, and then you know, uh, 2008 rolled around and was looking for another job, and just sort of fell into this one. I just saw an ad online, sounded intriguing, and 13 years later, yeah, here I am. Worked on a lot of contracts and a lot of categories in between.
That's great. That's awesome. I think a lot of us in this business didn't necessarily set out to get into it, or a lot of us don't have supply chain focused degrees, although they seem to be a little more popular now. Um,
Mhm.
so how did you go about the learning process? As you came up and slowly worked on more and more categories. Now I know you're an expert on probably close to 100, but how do you get there over time and still kind of um, show confidence to the stakeholders and customers you work with?
Yeah, no, it was a lot of learning sort of by the seat of my pants and just being tossed in the fire and having to figure it out. And that's one of the great things about having good contracts and good data, not to mention good people to lean on as far as resources go. And, so I definitely got a lot of help from various mentors along the way, and just in terms of, how to figure out how to go about sourcing any particular category. And I sort of feel like once you have the basic foundations of sourcing, you can apply those to a lot of categories generally, and a lot of it is just trying to figure out what's unique about the category. And I think the big question to just keep in mind there is what don't I know, and who might know the answer to that. So whether that's somebody in a stakeholder group, such as facilities, IT, et cetera, or somebody, your counterpart at the hospital supply chain office who you're working on the contract with, you bring that sort of solid sourcing foundation, and you can bolt on any sort of category specific expertise that you need to on the fly. Uh, I left out the supplier. They're obviously a very, very valuable resource that we lean on a lot throughout this. So, it is this collaboration in a way, and I like to think of it very much like that, and not anything that's sort of oppositional in nature. We're not negotiating against a vendor, against a customer. We're, trying to negotiate something that's mutually collaborative for everything here. So I think that's sort of the basic framework that I try to keep in mind. And there are categories still today that are new to me and that I'm learning, and that I just try to keep those core fundamentals in mind when I'm approaching a new one.
You also mentioned you came from an accounting background. How important is the ability to perform detailed analytics and analyses on some of these complex proposals? I mean, do you think that has helped you a lot as you've had your journey in strategic sourcing?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you definitely need to keep an eye out for details and things that don't sit right at first glance. You need to just, I guess, have that instinct to follow up on it. And, you know, one thing that I try to, and it's hopefully not a knock on my own self-confidence, but I try not to be the person of record on anything. Like if I'm going to make a recommendation to a client, or I'm going to include something in an analysis that I'm doing of proposals that we've received, I want to be able to tie that back to something directly submitted by the supplier, or ordered specifically by somebody at the hospital. I don't want anything to be sort of taken as my interpretation without being validated by somebody else. An example of that in the accounting world is, um, one of my claims to fame is I actually found an error in some of so there's regulatory bodies that come up with the accounting rules, and I actually found an error in some of their guidance, and I submitted that to them. I said it doesn't look right, and they said, "Oh, yes, you're right. Thank you for catching that." So I think that sort of critical eye is something that you definitely need to very much maintain and just have on at all times when you're looking at this stuff.
No, it's and even more importantly, probably in today's world where it seems like you can't get straight news on anything without a bias, being able to be a kind of transparent and neutral conduit of information. I'm sure is refreshing for those that you work with.
Yeah, for sure. And I try to keep that in mind as well. As we don't have any particular dog in the fight when it comes to who is going to be awarded a contract. I really look at it as my job being a function is, okay, it's my role to just line everything up as best I can and make sure that, you know, you are able to ask the questions that you need to in order to further validate supplier's proposal and determine, who is the best fit for your particular organization. Some suppliers, they, perform well generally, but there's always going to be one that may be better suited to a particular environment than another. And it's my job and our role to figure out how to discern that and ask those questions to make that selection.
Absolutely. So maybe we'll switch gears now. I know over the years you've sourced a varying number of categories in healthcare, from PPI and med surge, and now the focus has been on purchase services for quite some time. Um, what are some categories right now across your clients that you see trending, where they're able to make a significant impact in bringing savings to their bottom line?
Mhm. Yeah, in some cases, it depends on the product category. So we have the GPO offering, the precision benchmarking, as well as the general sourcing, and they tend to be a little different depending on which one you're looking at. But just sort of collectively, I could say that some things that are seeing a lot of demand for now, things like municipal waste, EVS, cleaning services, translation and transcription have been popular lately. Also, a lot of interest in blood, elevators, and managed print seems to be one that we're seeing. So that's just sort of a general selection of things where we seem to be seeing broad interest nowadays.
And is there anything in particular driving those trending categories that you think? Is it related to COVID? Obviously, blood shortages play into people needing to look at that category. But what's behind the fact that these categories are so popular to source right now?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you raised COVID. I think that's a lot of the driver for some of these. Some, just could be the contracting cycles and when they fall. But I think things like blood, you brought up the shortages. Obviously, there were a lot of price fluctuations. So you had shortages on the one hand, but you also had a decline in procedures during COVID that sort of offset that. But now, you're seeing that lack of demand or I'm sorry, lack of supply in that another aspect of blood that we're also seeing interest in, besides just the price generally, is a lot of people are looking to really nail down more favorable terms in their contracts regarding returns and exchanges. So that would be the types of products that you're able to return. Also, the sort of proactive inventory management of the blood supplier in terms of, what's the shelf life of the product that they're giving you? How do you make sure that they're giving you product with the longest shelf life? And if you do need to return something, what are the terms for that return? Are you getting credit or are you getting cash? And so a lot of people are looking to just shore up those return and exchange terms as well, in addition to blood, or I'm sorry, in addition to the price for blood. Then certainly other categories with utilization components like managed print have been uh, affected via COVID or affected by COVID. So, obviously, with people working remotely, there's been huge drop in demand for uh, printed pages in the office and things like that. People just aren't using a lot of those devices in their, their homework environments, and it'll be interesting to see which organizations change back to something resembling "quote unquote" normal as people go back into the office versus where you're going to see more flex employee in terms of people working from home and having a blend of going to the office just a couple days a week. I'm hearing different things from different clients as far as how they're approaching that and sort of what the long term will be. But certainly, you'll have some categories going back to normal and some that'll have a sort of new post COVID normal. And I think print is definitely one of those areas that's been affected by that. Office supplies I'll throw in there as well, that people are starting to take a look at and how to you know, modify their contracts and their pricing to reflect what that new normal is.
That totally makes sense. And I guess going along with that, how do they then go about tackling those conversations or those categories? Or are we talking about always having to do an RFP? Do you just
Mhm,
go to that supplier and try and change the terms or negotiate the terms mid-cycle? What's your best advice on how they go after those categories that you mentioned?
mhm. Yeah, it depends on the category and what the terms are with the supplier. So for print, you typically see these long-term lease agreements that do make it a little hard to renegotiate at least some of the pricing because you have things like buyout fees and things like that for canceling leases. So it depends on the supplier and what the arrangement is. I would say certainly approaching them with a renegotiation, if you can do that without totally redoing the contract, is a good optimal place to start in terms of bang for your buck. But yeah, we are seeing a lot of RFP interest in these categories lately. A lot of RFI as well, just that sort of uh, initial pre-sourcing event. Discovery phase, just to figure out, you can ask just a handful of questions to figure out how suppliers approach these things and what sort of terms they may be amenable to. And you can actually use the responses from the RFI to craft an RFP for a situation that may be more favorable than your current one. And the other thing to keep in mind here is this is also uncharted territory for the suppliers as well, right? It's you have hospital staff
Good
and
point.
supply
Yep.
chain personnel who are trying to figure out how to live in a post-COVID world. Well, suppliers haven't lived in a post-COVID world yet either, so they're still sort of scrambling to figure it out. And I think it's just again, we brought up just being collaborative and approaching this from a sense of how do we figure out something that's mutually workable. I think again this is an area that you just have to approach with that standpoint and realize that the supplier, yeah, they're in the same boat too. They have a business model that's been disruptive, and in order to keep being successful they got to figure out how are they going to meet their clients demands. And different clients, as we mentioned, are going to have different demands and situations as the workforce composition and how they are staffing their employees nowadays changes and whatnot.
No, that's such a good point. And going into that, obviously, we talk a lot about how purchase services are regional in nature, and regionality can lead to differences in the seasonality of purchase
Mhm.
services depending on where you are in the country. Um, Along with what you just mentioned, uh, how does seasonality play into it? And what are some categories that typically get worked on during the summer months that may be trending right now, more so, versus than at other times of the year?
Mhm. Actually, ironically, first thing that comes to mind as far as a summer category goes is snow removal. So, that's something you certainly want to have lined up well in advance of the first snowfall. Um,
Yep.
and on the flip side, things like landscaping, you don't want March or April. April is very late, actually. You don't want March to roll around without having a landscaping contract in place. That's certainly something you want to have locked up I would say by end of the winter best. So you have somebody lined up to do all the sort of the pre-spring cleaning and clearing and prepping activities to before the landscaping season really gets into full swing. Same with snow removal. On the other side, you really want to have that locked up before the first snowfall, so you're not in a position where you're scrambling without a contract and having to pay maybe inflated time and materials rates to get somebody to come out on emergency notice, et cetera. So those are the two big ones seasonally that I think of. Also, you have things that coincide around, flu seasons where there may be more of a clinical bent, um, things like that. Especially if you're looking at, uh, you know, blood a blood supplier that'll help you with blood drives and things like that in the near term. That may be something to think about. Is that's another thing that we see people trying to lock into their contracts with blood is, okay, how is the supplier going to help uh, manage the supply problem and proactively assist with blood drives and things of that nature. So those are just a few that come to mind.
Makes total sense. Um, we're starting to run out of time here today.
Mhm.
This has been really educational for me. I hope it's been really educational for everybody who's listening in as well. Maybe we end with just, Adam Ellsworth has been doing this now for 13 years. He's sourced so many different categories across the spectrum. What's your favorite category of all time to source?
Oh gosh. I've always sort of really liked the biomedical and radiology and equipment maintenance contracts for some reason. I think it's just to sound like a nerd here, that devices are pretty cool to me, and so those were ones where I, you know, kind of liked walking through the contracts and seeing what's covered. There's a lot of details with uptime and what types of parts are covered, what's not covered, basically who's allowed to even look at certain pieces of equipment on the hospital staff versus what you have to leave to the vendor. So there's a lot of ins and outs in that category. That's come to mind as one of my favorite. It's kind of a curveball question, but glad I had to respond for it.
That tells you a little bit about your love for analytics, though, there, because I would say you probably picked one of the most complex categories possible to be your favorite. So your background probably helps handle that.
I hope so.
Well, if you need help sourcing biomedical, call Adam up, and we'll send him your way. So, Adam, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today. Enjoyed the conversation, and we look forward to talking to you again some point in the future.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks, Mickey. Good talk. Good to talk to you as always.
We love to hear feedback from our listeners. So feel free to reach out to us to share what your team is focused on or to share what your supply chain experts are up to now. Look out for our next episode of Procure Pulse, the podcast for managed service leaders. We have a lot of exciting content in the works that we don't want you to miss. I'm Mickey Meehan, your host. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.